What if society was divided into a rigid hierarchy where your entire life, your status, your job, your future were all predetermined from birth? Today we're going to be talking about Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This is a dystopian sci-fi that's set in the distant future where humans have colonized Mars, and this is where we meet Darrow, the protagonist of the story. Darrow is living on Mars and he's a miner, aka a hell diver. And basically he's working under the belief that he and his team and his whole society that are living on Mars are working toward a future where Mars is fully terraformed and you can grow things on Mars just like you can on Earth. He's kind of thinking of himself as someone who's maybe making a sacrifice for the betterment of humanity. At the beginning of the book, his world is just completely turned upside down when he comes to the realization and discovers that Mars is already inhabited by humanity. And actually, on the surface, while he's laboring away in the mines underground, on the surface, there are full cities that are completely inhabited by humanity, and a full civilization that has existed there for his whole life. He realizes that he isn't like a hero of humanity, and he isn't, making a big sacrifice for a great cause. He's actually effectively living as an underground slave. Realizing that he's been betrayed and tricked and oppressed, he decides that what he's going to do is infiltrate this new discovered world that he stumbled upon, and he's going to try and topple the oppressive system that has been holding him and all of the people that he loved down for his entire life. This book, as I mentioned, is very often compared to The Hunger Games, and I think that's because it has a lot of similar themes. It is a blend of science fiction, rebellion, overthrowing an oppressive government, but I'll say that this book does feel a little bit more mature than The Hunger Games. There's a lot of morally grey characters that you wouldn't often find in young adult fiction, where usually it's just good versus evil. In this, even the protagonist makes some dubious decisions. I'll say this as well, if you want to make a direct comparison between The Hunger Games and Red Rising, the system that is oppressing the people in Red Rising, in my opinion, is more clearly defined than the capital from The Hunger Games. We're kind of given a clearer picture of the rules of society and the roles that people are supposed to be fulfilling within this society. So, for example, the Reds, using the color system, the Reds are built for labor, the Pinks are built for pleasure, the Silvers are built for banking and kind of finance, I think. The Greys are law enforcement, and then you've got the Golds, which are the ruling class. I think it's really easy as well to draw comparisons between the world of Red Rising and our world that we exist in. And I just never found it was that clear in The Hunger Games, the comparisons. Don't get me wrong, I really liked The Hunger Games back in the day, but I just thought that the theme wasn't as applicable to our world as Red Rising is. Since this is a dystopian sci-fi, it's always going to be the case where there's some info dumping at the very beginning of the book, right? So you're learning about the history, you're learning about the rules, you're learning about the new technology that exists in this distant future where we're living on Mars. And this phase, I think, is crucial to understanding the characters and especially Darrow and kind of learning about what is motivating him to do the things that he does later on in the book. But I feel like maybe some people might feel like the opening drags a little bit. I thought it was all right, but it was pretty heavy with getting hit with this rapid fire information straight off the bat. Once the story actually gets going though, and we discover the society that exists and the cities and the rules of the society, once Darrow kind of infiltrates this world, I do feel as though this is where the story really begins to find its feet. And for me, it became a lot more interesting. As far as the characters are concerned, there's so many characters in this book. And sometimes I was kind of struggling to keep track of them all. There were a few times when an antagonist was introduced and I felt, okay, this character is going to be the main antagonist of the whole story, maybe of the whole series. And then that character would get killed off, and then a new, worse antagonist would take their place. And that happened a few times as Darrow was kind of politically maneuvering around people, brushing them aside, or just straight up taking them out. And so, yeah, that happened a few times. There were a couple of moments where, I was cringing a little bit. But for the most part, I felt like the dialogue was actually pretty solid. And the characters and their motivations for doing the things that they're doing was great and believable in the context of this story. And Darrow as a protagonist is good. He is a good protagonist, but I feel as though one thing that would have made me enjoy the story a little bit more is if Darrow wasn't so impressive, and also if he wasn't so impressed with himself. It's kind of hard to make an underdog unlikable, but I just didn't really like him that much. And honestly, he was so powerful that I didn't really see him as much of an underdog. Kind of like considering where he comes from, I thought he was going to use that more to his advantage. Kind of like he's got street smarts, or because he's had to overcome obstacles in the past, he was going to use his tenacity that he'd earned through hard labor to kind of overcome these stronger, more impressive beings that, I'm talking about the golds now, that maybe have had an easier life and haven't had to overcome obstacles. I thought that was going to be the contrast, kind of a nature versus nurture thing. But, unfortunately, Darrow, it felt like Darrow was just the most impressive person in every room that he walked into. He's the best looking, he's the smartest, he's the strongest, he's the most charming. He's just the best at everything. And so when he overcame one of his rivals, I was like, yeah, of course. Of course he did. He's way stronger than this guy. Also, Darrow as a character is a little bit too forgiving of some of the things that his allies do in the book. I know he's supposed to be undercover and he's supposed to be kind of infiltrating this evil society, but he befriends people that have done really horrific things in this book. And I won't go into too much detail, but effectively people that have assaulted people and preyed on people, and again, I know he's trying to infiltrate, so he can't be really righteous and moral. But even in his kind of inner dialogue, he's saying to himself, "I know he's a monster, but he's our monster." And I feel as though Pierce Brown is kind of elevating these characters, these evil characters, into kind of anti-heroes, but they're not anti-heroes. They're just really demented kids. And yeah, there's no redeemable kind of qualities about them. They're disgusting. Have you ever had a friend where you go, oh, he's a bit dodgy, but we love him, and he's a good guy. He's not always on the right side of the law, and he does some questionable things, but overall he's a good person. I feel like Darrow was kind of thinking that about some of the characters. Maybe my interpretation was way off, but yeah, I was just like, get away from these people, man. And that's what I mean about the characters being morally grey is, they were presented as being morally grey, but I was like, no, they're jet black. They're jet black. As far as the writing is concerned, I found it to be really engaging. It's quite straightforward language, but it's really vivid. And the pace moves pretty rapidly after the first introduction to the book. I was pretty much on the edge of my seat the whole way. I was always wanting to know what was going to happen next. I was never bored. And so, yeah, I thought the writing style was really good. The pacing was solid. The prose isn't beautiful or lyrical or anything like that. It's really straightforward and simple. And for that reason, I would say that actually this book is kind of perfect if you like to listen to audiobooks, except I have one complaint about the audiobook, and honestly, this made it for me impossible to listen to the audiobook, and that is the choice of narrator. This isn't actually a criticism of the narrator, by the way. I'm not going after the narrator, but it's more like the casting for this particular book. He has a great voice, but it sounds as though he's maybe about 60 years old. And I don't know if he is or not, but that's just how it sounded to my ear. And Darrow and most of the characters in this book are about 17. And so I just couldn't get over that. Again, it's not the narrator's fault, but this is told from a first-person perspective. And so whenever there was a romantic scene, I was just picturing the worst case scenario. In my mind, because he's Irish as well, or the narrator has an Irish accent, I was really picturing Brendan Gleeson. And actually, there's like an SNL skit where Brendan Gleeson is hanging out with these college kids, and it really reminded me of that.
Remember when I told you I was 17?
Yeah, we all are.
I'm 67.
What?
Again, especially during the romance scenes, I was thinking, just get away from these kids. You have no business hanging out with these kids. And so, yeah, I listened to a couple of chapters and I thought, no, I'm just going to fully stick to the physical copy, I think. But with that being said, loads of people enjoyed the audiobook, so don't take my word for it. Listen to a sample, see if, you might like the narrator's voice. I'm not going to give any big spoilers in this review or anything, but the climax of the book, I didn't love it, but what I did like was what happened after the climax, where decisions are made that really create a lot of questions in my mind about the direction that the next book and the rest of the series is going to go in. And so I am excited to read the next book in the series. I've seen some reviews of Red Rising where people say, the first book is okay, you've just got to kind of get through it, and then by book 2, that's when things get really interesting. And I'll say that I actually did like Red Rising. And I am excited to read the next book, which is Golden Sun. I'm going to be releasing a review of this book as well after I've read it. If you've actually already read this book and you'd like to see my spoiler review, where I kind of do more of a deep dive and I talk about the characters, my favorite scenes, and the scenes that I didn't really like very much, then you can click up here for the spoiler review. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and happy reading.